Caribbean Sea hides a geological secret beneath its turquoise surface. Most of the islands you know were violently thrust upward by ancient volcanoes, leaving behind rich, dark soil. Turks and Caicos is entirely different. It is not volcanic at all. It rests precariously on the edge of a colossal, submerged limestone plateau called the Caicos Bank. This is a landscape of porous rock and shallow waters, where the earth is so thin it can barely hold onto a single seed. Rainfall is desperately scarce here, by all natural logic. This environment is deeply hostile to human settlement. Yet, this very hostility creates an optical illusion of absolute paradise. The lack of soil runoff is exactly what makes these waters the clearest, most blindingly blue on Earth. When you hear about this place, you only hear about the luxury. You are told about Grace Bay, a manicured strip of perfection tailored exclusively for the wealthy. You might also read the government travel advisories. Those warnings explicitly tell you to remain inside the brightly lit resort perimeters. They paint the areas beyond the tourist zones as unpredictable and dangerous. But staying behind that velvet rope means you will never truly see this country. I want to show you the truth that lies just beyond the warning signs. We are going to leave the artificial comfort of the five-star hotels. I will take you deep into 5 completely different, isolated worlds within this archipelago. We will witness the raw reality of the people who survive on this barren limestone. This is a journey into the breathtaking, often harsh and deeply resilient heart of Turks and Caicos. Our journey begins just a few miles from the gleaming resort lobbies, though it feels light years away. We are driving down a dusty, sun-bleached road into Blue Hills, one of the oldest settlements on Providenciales. There are no manicured lawns here. There are only weathered concrete homes with corrugated tin roofs, built to withstand the relentless salt winds. This is the territory of the local fishermen, known proudly as belongers. To understand their lives, you have to look out toward the deep blue horizon. The shallow turquoise water abruptly ends, dropping off into a dark, bottomless oceanic trench. This is where the real work happens. I am sitting on the edge of a small, heavily scarred fiberglass skiff. The engine hums a low, vibrating rhythm that you can feel deep in your chest. Beside me is a local freediver, a man whose skin is baked to a deep mahogany by decades of relentless sun. He does not use oxygen tanks. He does not use expensive dive computers. He relies solely on the capacity of his own lungs and a deep, ancestral understanding of the tides. We anchor near a patch of dense seagrass, swaying in the underwater currents. He takes 3 slow, deliberate breaths. His chest expands completely, taking in the heavy, salty air. Without a splash, he slips into the ocean. Through the crystal clear water, I watch him descend 30, then 40 feet down into the silent blue void. The pressure at this depth is immense, squeezing the air inside his chest. His eyes scan the ocean floor for a specific shape hidden among the sand and grass. He is hunting for the queen conch, the lifeblood of the local diet and economy. He spots a massive, algae-covered shell, snatches it from the seabed, and powerfully kicks his way back to the surface. He breaks the water with a sharp exhale, tossing the heavy shell into the wooden boat. But finding the conch is only the first half of the battle. The creature inside is anchored by a powerful muscle, creating a vacuum that is nearly impossible to break by force alone. He reaches for a specialized tool. It is a small rusted hammer with a sharp hook on one end. With the precision of a surgeon, he strikes the shell exactly at the second spiral from the top. The shell cracks open, revealing a tiny hole. He inserts a thin knife into this precise opening, severing the muscle that binds the creature to its home. With one smooth pull, the vacuum is broken, and the meat slides out perfectly intact. This is a skill passed down through generations of men who have lived entirely off the sea. He rinses the white meat in the ocean, cuts a piece right there on the boat, and hands it to me with a squeeze of wild, bitter lime. It is raw, sweet, and tastes intensely of the ocean we are floating on. This is their breakfast, eaten over a deck stained with seawater and algae. The salt dries on our skin, leaving a tight, stinging layer of white dust. The midday sun beats down unmercifully, reflecting off the water like a mirror. The fisherman does not wear sunglasses. He squints into the glare, reading the ripples on the surface to predict the incoming current. Every movement he makes is deliberate, conserving energy in an environment that constantly tries to drain it. Back on land, the Blue Hills Harbor is a symphony of raw survival. Wooden shacks lean against each other, offering small patches of much-needed shade. Old men sit on overturned buckets, meticulously untangling miles of green fishing line by hand. Children run barefoot across the sharp limestone gravel, their laughter mixing with the sound of the crashing waves. There is no pretense here. There is only the harsh, beautiful reality of people who belong to the sea. This ancient way of life is under immense pressure. The fishing grounds are shrinking. Climate change is altering the ocean temperatures, making the conch harder and harder to find. When you look behind the fishermen's modest houses, the contrast is deeply jarring. You can see the towering cranes building more luxury condos for foreigners. The cost of living here is astronomical, driven up by the very tourism industry that isolates them. The travel advisories warn tourists about these neighborhoods, citing economic desperation and petty crime. But what I see is a community fighting to hold on to its identity against the crushing weight of modern development. They are surviving in the margins, drawing their strength from the deep waters that the resorts only use for scenery. The invisible wall between the servers and the served is the real dividing line of Providenciales. We are going to cross another line now. We will leave the ocean behind to venture into a place where the jungle violently reclaims everything man tries to build. The water separating Providenciales from North Caicos is deceivingly shallow. It is a brilliant, blinding expanse of turquoise covering the immense Caicos bank. We cross this flat expanse on a small, weathered ferry, leaving the high-rises and the curated beaches far behind in the shimmering heat haze. The twin outboard engines cut through the chop, spraying warm, heavy salt water onto the metal deck. There are very few tourists on this boat. The passengers are mostly locals, carrying supplies, hardware, and groceries to the quieter islands. As we approach the harbor at Sandy Point, the landscape shifts dramatically. North Caicos is known locally by a deceptive title, the Garden Island. It receives slightly more rainfall than its neighbors, allowing a dense, green canopy to take hold over the white rock. But this is not the lush, forgiving, deep-soiled jungle of the South American mainland. It is a rugged, hostile coastal coppice forest, growing tenaciously out of solid, jagged limestone. We disembark and head deep into this thicket, driving down a rutted dirt road that seems to be actively swallowed by the creeping vegetation. Our destination is a ghost town born of supreme ambition and profound human suffering. We arrive at the silent ruins of Wade's Green Plantation. In 1789, a British loyalist named Wade Stubbs fled the aftermath of the American Revolution and arrived on this isolated rock with a grand, desperate vision. He brought with him hundreds of enslaved people of African descent to carve an agricultural empire out of the barren stone. Standing in the center of the estate today, the silence is heavy, absolute, and almost ringing in your ears. You can only hear the dry trade winds rustling through the broad leaves of the gumbo limbo and wild tamarind trees. Occasionally, the sharp call of a mangrove cuckoo pierces the quiet. The ruins themselves are an astonishing, heartbreaking testament to forced human labor. The enslaved workers built miles of complex boundary walls, massive estate houses, kitchens, and overseer quarters, using only the local limestone bedrock. Look closely at the remaining walls of the great house. There is absolutely no mortar holding these heavy, porous blocks together. They were cut entirely by hand, using crude iron tools, and painstakingly stacked to interlock perfectly. They have withstood over 2 centuries of violent Atlantic hurricanes through nothing but sheer gravity and meticulous friction. The physical toll of quarrying, cutting, and carrying this blinding white rock under the relentless Caribbean sun is unimaginable. The glare from the limestone would have burned their eyes, while the sharp edges tore at their bare hands. Stubbs intended to grow sea island cotton, a highly prized, silky commodity that fueled the textile mills of Europe. But the geology of Turks and Caicos fiercely resisted this forced industrial plan. The soil here is not deep, rich, or forgiving. It is a fragile, paper-thin layer of decaying organic matter resting directly on jagged, unforgiving karst limestone. To plant the cotton, the enslaved workers had to find natural depressions in the rock, scrape together whatever loose topsoil and bad guano they could find, and plant the seeds in these tiny, isolated pockets. Agriculture here was a constant, grueling battle against the porous stone, which acted like a giant sponge, draining fresh water away almost instantly into the underground water table. The entire operation relied entirely on unpredictable, sporadic rainfall. The workers had to carve massive catchments into the bedrock just to store enough drinking water to survive the dry seasons. For a brief, intense period, the plantation generated massive wealth for its absent owner. But nature always has the final word on these remote islands. The collapse of Wade's Green was not caused by human warfare or economic shifts. It was an absolute ecological rejection. A devastating plague of chenille caterpillars, native to the islands, swept through the fields, multiplying by the millions and stripping the cotton plants bare in a matter of days. This biological disaster was immediately followed by a series of brutal, extended droughts. The thin soil, having been stripped of its natural forest cover by the slaves' axes, simply dried up and blew away in the trade winds, or washed into the sea during the rare, violent storms. The land was completely exhausted, reduced back to bare white rock. By the 1820s, the plantation was entirely abandoned. The humans left, but the forest immediately began its slow, relentless, and spectacular work of erasure. Today, walking through the ruins is like walking through a slow-motion biological explosion. Massive strangler figs, known locally as bearded fig trees, have completely engulfed the main structures. Their thick, pale, snake-like roots cascade down the limestone walls like slow-moving, wooden lava. These roots are incredibly patient. They find every crack, every microscopic fissure in the hand-cut stone blocks. As the roots grow thicker, they expand with terrifying hydraulic pressure, slowly cracking, separating, and crushing the limestone back into dust. Native poisonwood trees, whose sap causes severe chemical burns to human skin, now guard the entrances. Wild mahogany saplings sprout directly from what used to be the grand dining room floor, reaching for the sunlight through the collapsed roof. The jungle is literally digesting the history of this place, absorbing the stone and the sorrow back into the earth. It is a profound, quiet, and humbling spectacle. There is no anger in this destruction, only the inevitable cycle of the local ecology. The tourists sipping cocktails on Grace Bay do not see this slow, magnificent battle between stone and root. They do not realize how quickly and quietly this island swallows human arrogance. Wade's Green stands as a monument to the ultimate futility of trying to conquer a land that was never meant for the plow. But our journey is far from over. We are about to leave the sunlit, overgrown forest and descend into complete, suffocating darkness. We are heading to an island where an entire ancient civilization vanished entirely beneath the ground. The causeway connecting North Caicos to Middle Caicos is a thin, fragile spine of limestone and asphalt, cutting directly across the shallow, blindingly bright water of the tidal flats. Driving across it, you feel a profound sense of leaving the modern world behind. Middle Caicos is the largest island in the entire archipelago by landmass. Yet it is home to fewer than 300 people. There are no resorts here. There are no supermarkets. There is only a rugged, wave-battered northern coastline and a vast, empty interior of dense scrub and jagged rock. But the true marvel of Middle Caicos is not found on its surface. It is hidden entirely underground. We are walking toward a subtle depression in the limestone ridge near the village of Conch Bar. The entrance is partially obscured by thick, thorny acacia bushes and wild orchids that cling desperately to the dry rock. As you step through the jagged mouth of the Conch Bar Cave system, the transition is physically shocking. The blinding, aggressive Caribbean glare is instantly extinguished, replaced by a thick, velvety darkness. The temperature, which was baking at nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit outside, drops by 20 degrees in a matter of seconds. The air here is heavy, cool, and smells intensely of damp earth, ancient minerals, and ammonia. You are entering the largest non-submerged dry cave system in the entire Bahamian-Lucayan archipelago. This subterranean labyrinth stretches for miles. A complex network of massive vaulted chambers, narrow crawl spaces, and deep, silent underground lakes. For the early inhabitants of these islands, this cave was not a tourist attraction. It was the ultimate sanctuary. Long before Columbus arrived in the Americas, this land was inhabited by the Lucayans, an indigenous Taino people who navigated the open ocean in massive hollowed-out dugout canoes. They lived a peaceful, subsistence lifestyle on the coasts. But when the brutal Atlantic hurricane season arrived, the flimsy coastal settlements offered no protection. The Lucayans would retreat into the deep belly of Conch Bar Cave. Standing in the main chamber today, you can point a flashlight up and see the towering, cathedral-like ceiling. Massive stalactites hang like jagged teeth, slowly dripping water into shallow limestone basins on the floor. In a country with zero natural rivers and incredibly rare rainfall, these dripping stalactites were a miraculous source of filtered, fresh drinking water. The Lucayans survived the catastrophic winds of the Caribbean by huddling in this absolute darkness, drinking the slow, rhythmic tears of the earth. They also used these chambers for their most sacred religious rites, placing offerings to their gods on the flat tops of stalagmites. But the sanctuary eventually became a silent tomb. Within a single generation of the Spanish arrival in the late 15th century, the entire Lucayan population of the archipelago was completely annihilated. They were not killed in grand battles. They were captured and forced into brutal slavery in the gold mines of Hispaniola. Or they simply succumbed to introduced European diseases to which they had zero immunity. By the year 1513, the islands of Turks and Caicos were entirely depopulated. The caves fell silent once again, swallowing the last traces of a gentle civilization. For over 300 years, the only inhabitants of Conch Bar Cave were the bats. If you shine a light into the upper crevices of the deeper chambers today, the ceiling appears to ripple and shift. It is a massive maternity colony of fruit bats and insectivorous bats. They hang by the thousands, shifting in the shadows, creating a soft, collective chittering sound that echoes endlessly off the limestone walls. Their presence here fueled another dark chapter of human exploitation in the late 19th century. Desperate for economic survival after the collapse of the cotton plantations, foreign companies realized that the cave floor was covered in feet of pure bat guano, a highly potent, nitrogen-rich fertilizer. Local laborers were sent down into this claustrophobic, toxic environment. With nothing but pickaxes, shovels, and small kerosene lanterns, they spent 12 hours a day scraping the highly acidic guano from the floor in near total darkness, breathing in dust that burned their lungs and eyes. They hauled heavy canvas sacks of the excrement up the slippery, treacherous rock faces to the surface, where it was shipped to the exhausted agricultural fields of North America. The extraction was brutal, low-paying, and deeply hazardous to their health. Today, the guano mining has long ceased, and the cave has reclaimed its quiet, terrifying majesty. Navigating it requires stepping carefully over massive boulders that have collapsed from the ceiling over millennia. There are no handrails here. There are no artificial floodlights or paved walkways. If your flashlight dies in the deeper chambers, you are immediately plunged into an absolute, suffocating blackness that the human eye can never adjust to. It is a stark, powerful reminder of human vulnerability. The tourists floating on the calm waters of Grace Bay are blissfully unaware of this massive, dark void beneath the earth. They do not see the layered history of survival, extinction, and grueling labor carved into these dripping walls. Conch Bar Cave stands as a silent witness to the fact that on these islands, nature provides shelter, but it also outlasts every human endeavor. We must now leave the cold, damp sanctuary of the underground. Our next destination will take us to the extreme southeastern edge of the country, back under the blistering sun, to a place where time itself has crystallized and frozen. Leaving the suffocating darkness of the caves, we travel 90 miles southeast, navigating the treacherous, shallow reefs of the Caicos Bank. The water here grows suddenly deeper, shifting from pale turquoise to a dark, bruising navy blue, before violently crashing against a tiny, triangular speck of land. This is Salt Cay. It is a place where time did not just stop, it crystallized. Stepping off the small wooden skiff onto the decaying concrete dock at Balfour Town, the first thing that strikes you is the overwhelming intensity of the light. Because the island is incredibly flat, rising only a few feet above sea level, and completely devoid of tall vegetation, the sun hits the ground with a physical, blinding force. There is nowhere to hide. The air itself tastes heavy and metallic on your tongue, completely saturated with aerosolized salt from the crashing Atlantic waves. It settles on your skin within minutes, drawing the moisture out of your pores, and leaving a tight, sticky white film on your arms and face. There are only about 60 human beings living on this entire island today. There are no paved highways, no traffic lights, and virtually no cars. The preferred method of transportation is a rusted bicycle with deflated tires, or a battered golf cart, moving silently over narrow roads made of crushed coral, dried seagrass, and compacted salt dust. Walking through the quiet, sun-bleached streets of the settlement, you immediately notice a bizarre architectural anomaly. These are not typical, lightweight Caribbean shacks built to sway with the wind. They are massive, blocky, two-story stone houses with incredibly steep, rusted corrugated metal roofs and large, dark cellars. They look exactly like the colonial houses in Bermuda, located over 1,000 miles to the north. This is because Salt Cay was entirely engineered by Bermudians in the late 1600s. They came to this barren rock for one single, desperate reason. They needed an endless supply of salt to preserve their massive catches of cod and whale meat. And Salt Cay, with its brutal, unshaded sun, constant dry trade winds, and near absolute lack of rainfall, was the perfect natural evaporation oven. Look closely at the roofs of these historic homes. They are pitched at extreme, sharp angles leading down into complex, hand-carved limestone gutter systems. These gutters funnel directly into massive underground cisterns built beneath the foundations of the houses. Every single drop of rain that falls on this island is captured and hoarded like liquid gold. There is absolutely no fresh groundwater here. If the rains fail, the island simply dries out and dies. We walk past the quiet, peeling houses, the wood of their shutters cracked and grayed by 3 centuries of corrosive wind, and head toward the center of the island. The landscape suddenly opens up into a vast, terrifyingly beautiful grid of shallow, walled pools. These are the salinas. They cover nearly half of the entire island's landmass, a massive geometric scar carved into the earth. Today, they are mostly dry, shimmering with a blinding white crust of pure sea salt that cracks and crunches under your boots like thick winter ice. Scattered across this desolate grid are the rotting, skeletal remains of massive wooden windmills. The remaining residents of Salt Cay live in profound, unshakable harmony with this decay. There is no frantic effort to rebuild the industry or to dredge the harbor for massive cruise ships. They live quietly, spending their days fishing in the deep oceanic trenches, repairing their weathered wooden boats and watching the sun set over the ruined windmills. They preserve their fish today, just as they did 300 years ago, laying it out on wooden racks to dry in the salty wind. They have accepted that the golden age of this island is over, and they have found an incredible, quiet peace in the silent, shimmering ruins. It is a rare, quiet kind of resilience. It is the strength to stay behind when the world moves on, finding beauty in a landscape that has been pickled and preserved in the very salt that once brought it wealth. But even this profound, sun-baked isolation cannot compare to the raw, violent power of nature that dictates daily life on our final island. We must travel north, into the direct path of the most destructive storms on Earth, to meet the people who refuse to run from the wind. The journey to our final destination requires crossing the turbulent Columbus Passage. This is a deep, treacherous oceanic trench that separates the Turks Islands from the Caicos Islands. The water here is no longer a gentle, inviting turquoise. It is a heavy, churning indigo, constantly whipped into a frenzy by the uninterrupted trade winds of the open Atlantic. We are heading to South Caicos, a rugged outcrop of rock, known affectionately by its residents as the Big South. This is not a place of manicured beaches or silent, frozen ruins. This is the undisputed fishing capital of the archipelago, a place defined by raw, kinetic energy and a terrifying proximity to nature's ultimate wrath. As our boat approaches the docks at Cockburn Harbor, the smell hits you before you even step onto the concrete. It is the heavy, pungent aroma of drying sea salt, diesel fuel, and thousands of spiny lobster shells baking in the afternoon sun. The harbor is a chaotic, vibrant symphony of survival. Fishermen are shouting over the roar of outboard engines, tossing heavy canvas bags of conch and lobster onto the cracked pavement. But as you walk away from the docks and into the residential streets, you immediately notice a stark, defensive posture in the architecture. The houses here are not designed for aesthetic beauty or ocean views. They are built like medieval fortresses. The walls are constructed from solid limestone blocks, nearly 2 feet thick. The windows are unnervingly small, often just narrow slits, facing away from the prevailing eastern winds. Heavy wooden shutters, reinforced with thick iron bolts, stand ready to be slammed shut at a moment's notice. This extreme fortification is not born of paranoia. It is a necessary adaptation to a violent geographical reality. South Caicos sits directly in the crosshairs of the Atlantic Hurricane Alley. There is no landmass to the east to break the momentum of a gathering storm. When a Category 5 hurricane makes landfall here, it brings sustained winds of over 150 miles per hour and a storm surge that can swallow entire neighborhoods. The scars of these catastrophic weather events are permanently etched into the landscape. Walking along the eastern ridge, you will come across a surreal and terrifying sight. Sitting upright in the middle of a dry, rocky field nearly a quarter of a mile inland is the rusted, decaying hull of a massive steel cargo ship. It was lifted out of the ocean entirely by the storm surge of Hurricane Irma and dropped onto the limestone like a discarded toy. The locals have never attempted to dismantle it. It remains there as a silent, towering monument to the absolute, crushing power of the ocean. You would expect the people living under this constant, existential threat to live in a state of anxiety or to abandon the island altogether. The official travel advisories often note the damaged infrastructure and lack of modern medical facilities, subtly suggesting that this is no place for a comfortable vacation. But the belongers of South Caicos possess a psychological resilience that is almost impossible for an outsider to comprehend. To understand their mindset, you have to watch them work in the very environment that threatens them. I am standing on the deck of a flat-bottomed skiff, gliding silently into the vast, shallow mangrove wetlands on the western side of the island. The water here is only 8 inches deep, a mirror of the blinding sky. The fisherman guiding the boat has turned off the engine. He stands on a small platform at the stern, using a 20-foot fiberglass pole to push us forward with agonizing slowness. He is not hunting for conch or lobster today. He is hunting for the bonefish, a creature known locally as the gray ghost of the flats. The bonefish is incredibly fast, perfectly camouflaged against the sandy bottom, and highly sensitive to the slightest vibration or shadow. The fisherman does not speak. He does not even seem to breathe. He stares intensely at the glare of the water, reading the microscopic ripples and the subtle shifts in the current. He spots a faint, cloudy puff of mud 50 yards away, the only sign that a bonefish is feeding on the bottom. With a fluid, deeply practiced motion, he casts a tiny, feather-light artificial fly perfectly into the wind, landing it silently just inches in front of the moving shadow. The tension in the air is absolute. There is a sudden, violent splash, and the fishing line rips through the water with the sound of a tearing bedsheet. The fisherman's face remains completely expressionless, perfectly calm as he fights the frantic, powerful fish. This deep, meditative focus is how they survive everything here. They do not fight the ocean, and they do not panic when the sky turns black. Back in the village, I sit with a group of elderly men under the shade of a massive mahogany tree. They are meticulously repairing a massive nylon fishing net, their thick, calloused fingers flying through the complex knots with muscle memory built over 70 decades. Next to them are the shattered, jagged foundations of a house that was completely erased by the last superstorm. They do not complain about the loss. They speak of the hurricanes not as tragedies, but as inevitable, cleansing resets of the earth. When a storm destroys their roofs, they wait for the wind to die down. They sweep the debris into the sea, and they simply start stacking the limestone blocks back together. They teach their children to weave nets and read the tides before they even teach them how to read a book. Their identity is so deeply intertwined with this harsh, unpredictable environment that the idea of evacuating to a safer, softer country is deeply offensive to them. They are the ultimate survivors, dancing on the edge of the abyss, finding immense joy in a life stripped down to its barest, most essential elements. As the sun begins to set over the sprawling, submerged plateau of the Caicos Bank, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the jagged limestone ridges, the true, unfiltered face of this archipelago finally reveals itself. Turks and Caicos is not just a manicured, sterilized playground designed to serve the global elite. It is a tale of two completely separate worlds. One world exists in the comfortable, artificial bubble of the luxury resorts, completely insulated from the immense labor and raw nature that sustains it. The other world is built on the harsh, undeniable reality of survival, carved painstakingly out of barren limestone and deep oceanic trenches. It is a world where nature always has the final word, and where human resilience is tested daily by the sun, the salt, and the wind. To truly know the heart of Turks and Caicos, you must have the courage to step beyond the velvet rope and stand in awe of the people who quietly, fiercely